They say the James Webb telescope can see to the edge of time itself, but when it stared into the farthest dark, something stared back. At first, the image was nothing more than a smear of pale light on black. The scientists thought it was an error, a reflection, a glitch. But as the data sharpened, the blur became a city. It floated in the cold between galaxies, a vast metropolis of silver and bone, lit by a dead sun that had burned out before Earth was even dust. The towers were wrong. Bent, spiraled, split into shapes that felt sickening to look at, like they were built for creatures that didn't move the way we do. And there were streets, miles of them, leading to a cathedral that seemed to swallow the stars behind it. One of the engineers swore they saw movement, a shifting shadow slow and deliberate, like a predator in tall grass. They laughed it off at first, but frame after frame the same shape appeared, closer each time, until it stood in the open under the light of that dead sun, looking straight at the telescope. No one could explain how it moved. The colony is billions of light years away, and yet it had taken a single step closer. And somewhere deep in the static of the final transmission, something whispered our names. My name is Danny Voss, and I maintain the servers that process James Webb data at the Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland. Yeah, that's right. While brilliant minds analyze humanity's greatest discoveries, I'm the guy crawling under desks at 3 a.m., fixing network crashes and replacing burnt-out hard drives. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had a PhD in astrophysics from Johns Hopkins, but one plagiarism scandal and a professor who held grudges had left me unemployable in research. So there I was, 6 months ago, babysitting computer systems in the same building where cosmic mysteries were being unraveled. But here's the thing about being the IT guy. You have access to everything. System administrators are digital ghosts. We see every file transfer, every login, every crash report. And when Dr. Holbrook's workstation starts acting up at 2:47 a.m., you sometimes stumble across classified telescope data that makes your blood run cold. That's how I first saw the images. Crumpled papers covered in astronomical coordinates, spectral analysis charts, and, Jesus Christ, photographs that made my skin crawl. Silver structures twisted against the void, shadows that seemed to move between frames. I shouldn't have taken them, I knew that. But curiosity killed more than just cats, and I'd been dead inside for months anyway. 3 weeks later, Dr. Holbrook was found in his office with his wrists opened and strange symbols carved into his desk. The official report called it a stress-induced breakdown. The unofficial whispers talked about something else entirely. They promoted me to assistant data analyst the next day, said they needed someone with my background to help process the anomalous readings. They had no idea I'd already seen what killed Holbrook, or that I was about to find out why. The promotion came with a keycard upgrade and access to Lab 7, the restricted wing where the real James Webb processing happened. My new supervisor, Dr. Wesley Kincaid, was a rail-thin man with nicotine-stained fingers who spoke in whispers and checked the corners of rooms before talking. Holbrook's workstation has been acting up for weeks, he said, leading me through corridors that smelled of ozone and burnt circuits. Crashes, data corruption, temperature spikes. The techs can't figure it out. I followed him past walls lined with server racks, their blue LED strips pulsing like artificial heartbeats. The deeper we went, the colder it got. My breath came out in small puffs. What kind of data was he processing? Kincaid paused at a heavy steel door marked with biometric scanners. Deep field observations. Sector 7G Delta. Nothing unusual officially. He pressed his palm to the reader. But between you and me, Danny, some datasets make the computers sick. The lab beyond was pristine white, dominated by a curved wall of monitors displaying star charts and spectral analyses. Holbrook's workstation sat in the center, 3 quantum processors humming beneath a desk covered in handwritten notes and empty energy drink cans. Jesus, I muttered, kneeling beside the tower. The metal casing was warm to the touch, almost feverish. When's the last time someone cleaned the cooling system? 2 days ago, temperature keeps climbing anyway. I popped the case open and immediately regretted it. The smell hit me like a physical blow, something between burnt plastic and rotting meat. The internal components looked normal at first glance, but as I adjusted my LED work light, shadows seemed to move independently across the circuit boards. That's weird. I blinked hard, refocusing, just eye strain from the fluorescent overhead. Danny, I need to tell you something. Kincaid's voice dropped even lower. Holbrook wasn't just processing standard observations. He was tracking movement patterns in deep space, specifically objects that shouldn't be moving. I looked up from the guts of the machine. Moving how? Faster than they should, and he glanced toward the door, in our direction. Before I could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Kincaid straightened, his nervous energy replaced by forced professionalism. A moment later, another technician entered, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of tan that came from weekend sailing rather than lab work. Dr. Kincaid, the monitoring station needs a systems check. The newcomer's eyes found mine. You must be the new guy. Blake Torrance, senior data analyst. His handshake lingered a second too long, fingers warm against mine. There was something unsettling about his smile. Too perfect, too practiced, like he'd spent years learning how to look trustworthy. Danny Voss, just trying to figure out why this thing's running hot. Holbrook always pushed the hardware too hard, Blake said, leaning closer to examine the workstation. His cologne mixed with the sick smell from the computer, creating something nauseating. Brilliant researcher, but paranoid as hell toward the end. Kept talking about patterns in the noise, signals that weren't signals. I noticed his pupils were dilated despite the bright lab lighting. Whatever Blake was on, it wasn't just caffeine. Did you work directly with him? Every night for 3 months. Blake's hand brushed my shoulder as he reached past me to point at the monitors. See these spectral readings? Holbrook claimed they were communication attempts. Said something was trying to establish contact through the telescope's data stream. The screens flickered as he spoke, displaying images that made my stomach clench. That same silver city floating in the void, but now I could see details that hadn't been visible in the crumpled printouts. Geometric structures that hurt to look at directly. Streets that seemed to spiral inward like a nautilus shell. And in the center, that cathedral thing with its impossible spires reaching toward nothing. What's the current analysis consensus? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Blake and Kincaid exchanged a look that lasted too long. Officially, stellar remnant formation in a previously unmapped region, Kincaid said. Unofficially. Unofficially, we've detected 17 distinct gravitational displacement events in the past month, Blake finished. Each one brings the object approximately 0.003 light-years closer to our galactic neighborhood. The numbers hit me like ice water. Even at impossible speeds, that kind of movement would take millennia to become a threat. But the implications? That's not possible. Nothing that massive could accelerate through intergalactic space without... The lights died. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red. But in that moment of absolute darkness, I swear I saw something else on the monitors. Not the Silver City, but something inside it. A figure standing in what might have been a window, gesturing with 2 long arms toward the camera, toward us. Power grid fluctuation, Blake said quickly, but his voice carried a tremor. Happens sometimes when the processors run hot. I looked down at Holbrook's workstation. The temperature display read 187 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to fry circuits, but somehow still running. And in the reflection of the black monitor screen, I caught sight of text scrolling across another terminal behind me. Coordinates, dates. And at the bottom, a single line that made my hands shake. Estimated arrival 72 hours. Blake, I said slowly. What exactly happened to Holbrook? His perfect smile never wavered. He looked too long at things that don't like being watched. The next 18 hours blurred together in a haze of system diagnostics and mounting dread. I'd managed to stabilize Holbrook's workstation temporarily, but the temperature readings made no sense. The cooling system was functioning perfectly, yet the processors continued running at near critical levels. Blake had volunteered to help with the overnight monitoring, which meant we were alone in Lab 7 while the rest of the facility slept. He'd shed his lab coat hours ago, working in just a fitted black t-shirt that showed off the kind of physique that came from serious gym time. Every time he leaned over my shoulder to check the displays, I caught myself breathing deeper, taking in his scent beneath the lab's sterile air. "Danny, you need to see this." His voice was tight with something between excitement and fear. I looked up from the diagnostic panel to find him standing before the main display wall, bathed in the blue glow of deep space imagery. The Silver City hung there in impossible detail, so sharp it seemed like we could reach out and touch those twisted spires. "The resolution's improved?" I asked, moving to stand beside him. "More than improved. Look at the metadata timestamp." The file information made my stomach drop. The image was dated 3 hours in the future. "That's impossible. The telescope's data stream has a built-in delay of 6 hours minimum," Blake finished. "I know, but somehow we're receiving images that haven't been taken yet." I stared at the timestamp, double-checking the system clock. No matter how I calculated it, the math was wrong. Could be a calibration error in the temporal indexing system. Blake's hand found my lower back, fingers pressing against my spine through the thin fabric of my shirt. "Danny, I need to show you something else, but not here." He led me through a maintenance corridor I'd never seen before, past humming server rooms, and into what looked like a disused observation deck. The dome overhead was real glass, not monitors, offering an unobstructed view of the Maryland sky. City lights washed out most of the stars, but the darkness felt infinite anyway. "This is where Holbrook used to come when the data got too overwhelming," Blake said, his voice echoing in the empty space. Said it helped him remember that space was supposed to be empty. He pulled out a tablet, fingers dancing across the screen until images appeared. Dozens of them, all showing the same impossible city, but from different angles, different magnifications. Some were so detailed I could make out individual structures within the silver towers. "I've been analyzing these for weeks," he continued. "The architectural patterns, the material composition, the energy signatures. Danny, this thing isn't just old, it's ancient. The carbon dating algorithms put its construction at roughly 2.8 billion years. That predates complex life on Earth by everything," he said, stepping closer. "But here's the really fucked up part. The spectral analysis shows active technology. Power signatures, communication arrays, environmental systems. It's not a relic, it's inhabited." The tablet screen flickered, and for a moment I saw something that made my breath catch. Movement in one of the silver towers, a shadow passing behind what might have been a window. Too tall, too angular to be human. "Blake, we need to report this to who?" His laugh was bitter. "NASA administration? The Pentagon? They'll classify it, bury it, and us along with it, just like they did with Holbrook." I turned to face him fully, noting how close we were standing, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin, to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Holbrook didn't kill himself." Blake's hand touched my chest, fingers spreading over my heartbeat. "I'm saying he found something in that data stream that scared someone enough to silence him. And I'm saying that if we're not careful, we're next." Back in Lab 7, the workstation had gotten worse. The temperature reading now showed 201 degrees Fahrenheit, and the metal casing was too hot to touch directly. But somehow, impossibly, it was still running, still processing, still receiving data from a telescope billions of miles away. "The quantum processors should have failed hours ago," I muttered, pulling on heat-resistant gloves to examine the internal components. "This is beyond any normal operating parameter." Blake was at the main terminal, scrolling through lines of code that seemed to writhe and shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. "Danny, the arrival countdown has changed." I looked over at his screen and felt the blood drain from my face. Where it had previously shown 72 hours, now it read 31 hours, 14 minutes, 23 seconds. That's not possible, even if this thing was moving at near light speed. "It's not just moving," Blake interrupted, "it's accelerating. And according to these gravitational displacement readings, it's warping space-time around itself, folding distances like origami." The implications hit me like a physical blow. If something that massive could manipulate space-time, then traditional physics became meaningless. Travel times, distances, even causality itself could be bent to its will. "We need to evacuate the facility," I said. "Alert the authorities, get people away from here." Blake's expression went cold. "You're not thinking clearly. If this thing can fold space, do you really think running to the next state will matter? Or the next continent?" He was right, and we both knew it. Whatever was coming had the entire Earth in its crosshairs. The workstation's cooling fans suddenly stopped spinning. In the silence that followed, I could hear something else, a low humming that seemed to come from the circuits themselves. Not electrical noise, but something almost organic, like breathing. "Blake, shut it down, shut everything down right now." But he was staring at the main display with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure terror mixed with something that looked almost like hunger. "Danny, look at the city. Really look at it." Against every instinct, I did. The silver towers seemed closer now, their impossible geometry more defined. And in the shadows between the spires, I could see them, figures moving with deliberate purpose. Tall, angular shapes that reminded me of praying mantises crossed with architectural blueprints. One of them stopped walking and turned toward the camera, toward us. It had too many joints in its limbs, and where its face should have been was something that looked like a geometric pattern made of black metal and starlight. But the worst part was the recognition in its posture. It knew we were watching. It knew we were here. And slowly, impossibly, it began to wave. "Jesus Christ," Blake whispered. "It's greeting us." The countdown on his screen flickered and updated again. 18 hours, 7 minutes, 41 seconds. But now there was something else. A new line of text scrolling across the bottom of the display in letters that seemed to burn themselves into my retinas. "Hello, Danny. Hello, Blake. We've been waiting so very long to meet you." The workstation's fans kicked back to life with a grinding shriek, and every screen in Lab 7 went white for exactly 3 seconds. When the displays came back online, the city was gone. But the countdown kept running. The silence that followed was deafening, not just quiet, an absolute vacuum of sound that made my ears pop. Even the constant hum of the building's ventilation system had stopped. Blake and I stood in Lab 7, surrounded by dead screens and the smell of overheated electronics, while somewhere in the darkness outside, something ancient adjusted its course toward Earth. "We have to tell someone," I said, my voice sounding hollow in the sudden stillness. "Pentagon, NSA, hell, even CNN. People need to know." Blake turned away from the blank monitors, his face pale in the emergency lighting. "And say what exactly?" "That aliens who know our names are coming to visit. That we discovered them by illegally accessing classified telescope data. They'll lock us up as national security threats before we finish the first sentence." "So we just sit here and wait for the world to end? We figure out what they want?" He moved to Holbrook's desk, rifling through the dead scientist's handwritten notes. "These beings have had 2.8 billion years to perfect interstellar travel. If they wanted to destroy us, they could have done it already. The fact that they're announcing their arrival means something." I wanted to argue, but part of me recognized the logic. Still, the countdown ticking away in my peripheral vision made every second feel precious. "Blake, what if you're wrong? What if this is just them being polite before they wipe us out?" He looked up from the notes, and I saw something in his expression that made me step closer. Fear, yes, but also a strange kind of excitement, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump. "Danny, I've been having dreams about them for 3 weeks, every night since I started working with Holbrook's data. Dreams where I'm walking through that silver city and they're showing me things. Technologies we can't imagine, solutions to problems we haven't even discovered yet." His hand found mine, fingers interlacing. What if this isn't an invasion? What if it's an invitation? Before I could respond, the lab door burst open. Dr. Kincaid stumbled in, his normally pristine lab coat torn and stained with something dark. Behind him came 2 security guards I'd never seen before, military types with the kind of hard edges that spoke of recent combat experience. Dr. Kincaid. Blake released my hand, moving toward our supervisor. What's happening? Kincaid's eyes were wild, darting between us and the blank monitors. They shut down the telescope, complete communications blackout, said it was a routine maintenance window, but I heard the calls coming in from Colorado, Hawaii, even the ESA stations in Chile. Everyone's going dark. One of the security guards, a thick-necked man with sergeant's stripes, stepped forward. Dr. Voss, Dr. Torrance, you're both being reassigned effective immediately. Gather your personal effects and report to Sub-Level 3 for debriefing. Reassigned to what? I asked. That's above your clearance level. Blake moved closer to me, close enough that I could feel the tension radiating from his body. We're not going anywhere until someone explains what's happening. The sergeant's hand drifted toward his sidearm. Sir, that wasn't a request. Kincaid suddenly grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep hard enough to bruise. Danny, the workstation. Before they arrived, I managed to decode some of Holbrook's encrypted files. The beings in that city, they're not just coming here, they're coming for specific people. People whose quantum signatures match their targeting algorithms. Targeting algorithms? Blake's voice had gone very quiet. They've been scanning our broadcasts, our internet traffic, our genetic databases, building profiles of individuals who meet certain criteria. High intelligence, specific skill sets, particular psychological markers. Kincaid's grip tightened. Danny, your name was on the list. Both of your names. The laboratory suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. My breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the metal surfaces around us. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the realization creeping through my mind like ice water, a memory of my own arrogance, my own curiosity that had driven me to access Holbrook's data in the first place. The plagiarism scandal, I whispered. At Johns Hopkins, it wasn't plagiarism. Blake's head snapped toward me. What? My dissertation research. I was studying quantum entanglement across galactic distances, theoretical applications for faster-than-light communication. My advisor said the mathematics were impossible, that I was chasing fantasies. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. But I kept working on it. Published the preliminary findings on academic forums, posted questions on research networks. Jesus Christ, I was advertising myself to them. The sergeant and his partner were backing toward the door now, their faces showing the kind of professional concern that preceded extreme violence. But Kincaid wasn't finished talking. The quantum signatures they're tracking aren't just intellectual, he said urgently. They're looking for minds that think like they do. People who can conceptualize non-linear space-time, who can process mathematical relationships that break human cognition. They're not coming to destroy us, Danny. They're coming to recruit us. Blake laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Recruit us for what? To help them finish something they started billions of years ago. The temperature in the lab plummeted another 10 degrees. My breath came out in thick clouds, and the metal surfaces began groaning as they contracted. But worse than the cold was the sound now filling the air. A low harmonic vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once, like a massive tuning fork struck somewhere deep in the Earth's core. On the dead monitors around us, text began appearing. Not on the screens themselves, but somehow burned into the black glass. Greetings, selected candidates. Integration protocols will begin in 11 hours, 23 minutes, 17 seconds. Please remain calm during the preparation phase. Integration, I managed through chattering teeth. Kincaid's response was cut off as something happened to him. His body went rigid, back arching impossibly as his eyes rolled back to show only white. When he opened his mouth to scream, no sound came out. Instead, silver light poured from his throat like liquid mercury. The security guards raised their weapons, but Blake grabbed my hand and yanked me toward the emergency exit. Move! Now! Behind us, Kincaid's body began to convulse as the silver light spread across his skin, creating geometric patterns that hurt to observe directly. His limbs were elongating, joints bending in directions human anatomy didn't allow. And through it all, his face maintained an expression of absolute ecstasy. We burst through the emergency door and into the stairwell, but the building's infrastructure was changing around us. The walls had taken on a metallic sheen, and the air itself seemed thicker, more viscous. Each breath required effort, as if the atmosphere was slowly being replaced with something designed for different lungs. "Blake, we need to get to the surface," I gasped. "Surface won't matter," he replied, but he was climbing anyway. "Don't you see? This is happening everywhere. Every facility that's been in contact with the telescope data. They're not just coming, they're already here, changing things from the inside out." 3 floors up, we encountered our first transformed guard. What had once been human now stood 7 feet tall, with silver skin that reflected our panicked faces in fractal patterns. It watched us, with eyes like black stars, and spoke in a voice that sounded like wind chimes made of bone. "Integration candidates should not attempt to flee. The process is painless when embraced willingly." Blake pulled out his keycard and swiped us through to the next stairwell. "How much of the building has been compromised?" As if in answer, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, but the red glow revealed walls that were no longer quite walls, surfaces that seemed to breathe and pulse with their own internal light. We were trapped inside something that was no longer entirely human architecture, and somewhere in the building below us, more people were beginning their transformation into something else, something that would be ready to welcome their creators home. My quantum signature research hadn't just attracted their attention, it had given them a roadmap for changing human consciousness itself. And now, with less than 12 hours remaining, I was beginning to understand that escape wasn't the goal. Compliance was. We made it to the roof access before the building's transformation could catch us. Blake's keycard still worked on the final door, though the scanner flickered silver for a moment before accepting the authorization. Outside, the Maryland night sky looked wrong. Too many stars, arranged in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, like a connect-the-dots puzzle drawn by something that didn't understand human constellations. "Danny, look at your hands," Blake said, his voice tight with something between fear and fascination. I glanced down and nearly lost my balance. My fingertips were glowing with the same silver light we'd seen pouring from Kincaid's throat. Not painful, not uncomfortable, just there, like I'd dipped them in luminescent paint. "It's starting," Blake continued, examining his own hands. His glow was brighter, more defined. The integration process. Whatever they did to the building, we were exposed. The revelation should have terrified me. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Clear-headed in a way I hadn't experienced since graduate school. "How long do we have?" "Based on Kincaid's transformation rate, maybe 6 hours before we're no longer recognizably human." Blake moved to the roof's edge, looking out over the Goddard facility. Half the buildings were dark, but the others pulsed with that same silver radiance. "But Danny, I need to tell you something about the dreams I mentioned. Now's not really the time for... It is exactly the time." He turned back to me and I could see silver threads beginning to trace patterns beneath his skin. "The beings in that city, they showed me what's coming. Not to Earth, but to this entire sector of the galaxy. Something they call the hunger." I sat down hard on a ventilation unit, my legs suddenly unsteady. The glow in my hands was spreading up my forearms now, and with it came knowledge I hadn't possessed moments before. Mathematical concepts that human language couldn't express, geometric relationships that existed in dimensions we didn't have names for. "The space colony isn't an invasion force," I said, the words coming from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. "It's a refugee camp." Blake nodded grimly. 2.8 billion years ago, their civilization spanned multiple galaxies, technological mastery beyond anything we can imagine. But they discovered something, or something discovered them. A force that doesn't just destroy matter and energy, it consumes the very possibility of existence. The silver light was reaching my elbows now, and with each inch it advanced, I understood more. The being's desperate journey across intergalactic space, their careful selection of worlds with developing intelligence, the integration process that wasn't conquest but preservation. "They're trying to save us," I whispered. "Not just us, our potential. Human consciousness processes reality in ways their species lost billions of years ago. We see patterns they can't, make intuitive leaps that their logic-based minds struggle with. They need us to help them find a solution to something they've been running from for epochs. A new sound filled the night, not the harmonic vibration from before, but something darker, a low rumble that seemed to come from the space between stars. The wrongly arranged constellations flickered and dimmed as if something vast was moving behind them. Blake, how much time do we have before this hunger thing arrives? He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they reflected starlight like mirrors. According to their calculations, 18 months, maybe less if it's learned to navigate quantum shortcuts. The building beneath us shuddered, and through the roof access door came the sound of multiple footsteps. Not human gates, too measured, too precise. The transformed guards were hunting us. "We need to get off this roof," I said, standing despite the vertigo that came with increased cranial blood flow. My cardiovascular system was adapting to support neural changes I couldn't fully comprehend yet. Blake was already moving toward the emergency ladder on the building's south face. "There's a secondary facility in Baltimore, hardened against electromagnetic interference, isolated from the main network. If we can reach it before the transformation completes, we might be able to establish contact with other unchanged humans." And then what? Start an underground resistance? The ladder rungs were slick with condensation that glowed faintly silver. Each one we descended brought us closer to ground level, where more transformed figures moved with purposeful coordination. Then we decide whether humanity survives this by fighting or by choosing our own evolution. The service road behind the facility was eerily quiet, but our enhanced senses picked up movement in the shadows. Other escaped researchers maybe, or security personnel who'd avoided initial exposure. Blake led us through a maintenance area toward the parking structure, moving with the kind of confidence that suggested his transformation was further along than mine. "Danny, there's something else you need to know," he said as we reached his car. "The integration process isn't random, it's selective. The beings can only successfully merge with minds that share certain cognitive patterns with their species. That's why your quantum research attracted their attention." I stopped walking. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that not everyone can be saved this way. Maybe 1 in 10,000 humans has the right neural architecture. The rest..." He trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. "The rest die when the hunger arrives. Or they die during failed integration attempts." The car's engine turned over on the third try, though the dashboard displays flickered with symbols I somehow understood, but couldn't read. Blake pulled out of the parking structure with practiced ease, heading north toward the Baltimore Beltway. "How long have you known?" I asked as we merged into surprisingly light traffic. Either it was later than I thought, or fewer people were driving tonight. "About the real purpose of the integration." Blake's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The silver patterns under his skin had spread to his neck, creating fractals that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. "Since the third night of dreams, they showed me Earth's future, 2 potential timelines. In one, we resist the integration and face the hunger with purely human technology. Extinction in approximately 14 months. And in the other, survival, but not as a purely human species. A hybrid consciousness that retains the best of both evolutionary paths while gaining the tools necessary to fight something that has already consumed 7 galaxies." I watched the city lights streak past the window, each one representing thousands of people who had no idea their species was about to face an existential choice: integration or extinction, evolution or death. "Blake, how do we know the beings are telling the truth? What if this is just an elaborate method of conquest?" He was quiet for several miles before answering. "Because they're dying too, Danny. The integration process kills them just as surely as it changes us. They're sacrificing their pure genetic line to create something new, something that might have a chance against the hunger." The Baltimore facility appeared ahead, a squat concrete building that looked more like a Cold War bunker than a research station. But as we approached, I could see lights in the windows and vehicles in the parking area. Other survivors, gathering for what might be humanity's final strategic meeting. "Danny," Blake said as he parked the car, "before we go in there, I need you to know something. The integration process, it doesn't just change our bodies and minds. It changes how we feel about each other. Emotional bonds become more intense, more essential to survival. I looked at him, noting how the silver tracery made his features appear both alien and somehow more beautiful than before. What are you trying to tell me? I'm trying to tell you that what I'm feeling right now might be the integration talking, but it might also be the most honest emotion I've ever experienced. Before I could respond, he leaned over and kissed me, brief, desperate, tasting like copper and starlight. When we separated, I could see more vehicles approaching the facility. We had perhaps an hour before whatever remained of human authority arrived to shut down our gathering. An hour to decide whether to fight the future or embrace it, whether to remain human or become something new enough to survive what was coming. The Baltimore facility's interior was a maze of reinforced corridors and electromagnetic shielding that made my enhanced senses feel muffled, like cotton stuffed in my ears. 37 people had gathered in the main conference room. Researchers, technicians, and military personnel who'd escaped the initial integration wave. Most showed early signs of the transformation, silver threading beneath their skin, eyes that reflected light too sharply, movements that carried an unnatural precision. The situation is worse than we initially calculated, announced Dr. Lawrence Gottfried, a quantum physicist from the Naval Research Laboratory. Silver patterns traced elaborate geometries across his bald scalp as he spoke. Integration sites have appeared simultaneously at 14 major observatories worldwide. The beings aren't just targeting individuals, they're systematically converting our entire astronomical infrastructure. Blake and I had taken seats near the back of the room, close enough to the emergency exits to make a quick departure if necessary. But as Gottfried continued his briefing, I began to understand that running was no longer an option. Satellite telemetry shows the colony ship has entered our solar system's outer edge, Gottfried continued. Current trajectory puts it at Earth orbit in approximately 4 hours, but that's not the most concerning development. He activated a holographic display that materialized above the conference table, a 3-dimensional map of local space that made my brain itch to look at directly. The colony ship appeared as a massive silver structure, but surrounding it were dozens of smaller objects moving in formation. "Escort vessels?" asked a woman from the CDC whose name tag read Dr. Patricia Vance. "Worse," Blake said quietly, and something in his tone made everyone turn toward us. "Those aren't ships. They're mobile integration platforms, designed to process entire populations simultaneously." The room erupted in concerned murmurs, but I was focused on Blake's expression. There was something different about him now, a calmness that bordered on serenity. The silver patterns under his skin had spread to cover most of his visible body, creating fractals that seemed to move independently of his pulse. "How do you know that?" Dr. Vance demanded. Blake stood slowly, his movements carrying the same measured precision I'd seen in the transformed guards. "Because I've been in communication with them for the past 6 hours. The integration process includes quantum entanglement with the collective consciousness. I can access their historical databases, their tactical assessments, their emotional experiences across geological timescales." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees as everyone processed the implications. Blake wasn't just transforming, he was already functioning as their agent. "Danny," he continued, his gaze finding mine across the crowded space. "The plan we discussed in the car, reaching this facility, gathering the survivors, it wasn't my idea. They guided me here. They wanted all the remaining viable candidates in one location to streamline the final integration phase. I stood as well, backing toward the exit while calculating distances and obstacles. Blake, you're still human enough to fight this. Whatever they're showing you, it's not the complete picture." His smile was gentle, almost loving, but his eyes reflected starlight that hadn't existed moments before. "Danny, I am fighting this, but not in the way you think. The hunger isn't coming in 18 months. It's already here. In the spaces between galaxies, consuming the fundamental structure of reality itself. The being's refugee fleet isn't the first wave of evacuation, it's the last." Dr. Gottfried was frantically working at a control panel, trying to activate the facility's security protocols, but the electromagnetic shielding that had protected us from outside interference now trapped us inside with a compromised ally. The integration platforms will begin planetary processing in 90 minutes, Blake continued. Anyone with compatible neural architecture will be preserved in hybrid form. Everyone else. He paused, and for a moment I saw genuine grief in his expression. Everyone else will experience a peaceful transition to non-existence. Genocide, Dr. Vance spat. Triage, Blake corrected. When your species discovers that consciousness itself is under threat, you make the hardest possible choices to preserve what can be saved. I reached the emergency exit and found it sealed, not locked, but somehow fused at the molecular level. The walls around us were beginning to take on that same metallic sheen we'd seen at Goddard. The facility's shielding hadn't protected us from transformation. It had trapped us inside an accelerated conversion chamber. Blake, how long have you been working with them? Since the moment I volunteered to help with Holbrook's workstation, they needed someone already inside the project, someone with access to both the data streams and the personnel files, someone who could identify and gather the most viable candidates. His hand moved to his chest, fingers spread over his heart. Danny, everything I told you was true. My feelings, the danger we're facing, the choice humanity has to make. But I've already made my choice. The other survivors were beginning to panic as silver light seeped through the ventilation system. Some tried to break down the sealed doors with improvised weapons, while others huddled together as if proximity might somehow shield them from the inevitable. But Dr. Gottfried had managed to activate something, a quantum isolation field that created a bubble of normal space-time around the conference table. Emergency protocols are online, he announced. We have approximately 30 minutes of protection before the field collapses. 30 minutes to do what? I demanded. To upload a warning to the Deep Space Monitoring Network. Other civilizations need to know what's coming. Maybe they can prepare better than we did. Blake moved toward the isolation field, but the quantum barrier repelled him like a solid wall. Lawrence, that transmission will just draw the Hunger's attention to more potential victims. You're not saving anyone. You're signing death warrants for entire star systems. Better than letting it spread in secret, Gottfried replied, his fingers dancing over holographic controls that hurt to observe directly. If we're going to die as a species, at least we can warn others. The isolation field suddenly expanded, encompassing me and 3 other unintegrated researchers. Inside the bubble, my enhanced senses dulled back to merely human levels, and the knowledge that had been flooding my consciousness faded to whispers. Danny, get in here, Gottfried called. Your quantum research might be the key to establishing contact with extragalactic civilizations. I hesitated, watching Blake through the energy barrier. His transformation was accelerating now, silver patterns spreading across his face, his limbs elongating slightly to accommodate enhanced musculature and nervous system modifications. But his expression remained focused on me with desperate intensity. If you go in there, you'll die when the field collapses, he said. But if you come with me willingly, you'll retain enough human consciousness to make meaningful choices about our species' future. What future? I shot back. You just said everyone else is going to experience peaceful transition to non-existence. Not everyone. The integration platforms can process roughly 10 million humans before their power systems require recharging. 10 million people, selected for optimal genetic and cognitive diversity, preserved in hybrid form to continue our species' legacy. Dr. Vance, who'd remained outside the isolation field, suddenly laughed bitterly. 10 million out of 8 billion. That's not preservation, that's extinction with a footnote. Blake's transformed features showed something that might have been pain. Patricia, you're looking at this through the lens of individual mortality, but consciousness isn't individual, it's collective. The hybrid form maintains the essential patterns of human thought while gaining access to technologies and perspectives developed over cosmic timescales. Those 10 million people will carry forward everything meaningful about our species. Inside the isolation field, Gottfried had established connection with deep space monitoring stations in Chile, Hawaii, and the Canary Islands. Danny, I need your quantum entanglement protocols. If we can create a superluminal communication burst, we might reach civilizations the hunger hasn't found yet. I looked between Blake and the transmission array, understanding that my next choice would determine not just my own fate, but potentially the fate of other species across the galaxy. Help Gottfried send a warning that might save distant civilizations while dooming myself to death when the field collapsed, or join Blake in a transformation that would preserve some fragment of humanity while abandoning billions to oblivion. Through the facility's walls, I could feel the approach of massive objects, the integration platforms entering Earth's atmosphere. The air itself was beginning to shimmer with silver light as reality bent around technologies beyond human comprehension. "Danny," Blake said softly, his voice now carrying harmonics that resonated in dimensions I couldn't name. "The choice isn't between life and death. It's between evolution and extinction, between joining something greater than ourselves or clinging to a form of existence that was already doomed." Dr. Gottfried's transmission array began powering up with a whine that made my teeth ache. 40 seconds to optimal signal strength. "Danny, I need those protocols now." Behind Blake, the sealed doors were dissolving as more transformed figures entered the facility. Not the angular beings from the colony ship, but humans in various stages of integration. Their faces showed the same serene certainty I saw in Blake's expression, the confidence of people who'd glimpsed something larger than individual survival. 10 seconds, Gottfried announced. I made my choice. Stepping forward to the transmission controls, I began inputting the quantum entanglement sequences that would carry humanity's final warning to the stars. As my fingers moved across the holographic interface, I felt Blake's anguish through the barrier. Not anger, but profound grief for what he saw as my unnecessary sacrifice. The transmission burst launched just as the isolation field collapsed. And in the microseconds before silver light flooded my consciousness, I saw Blake reach through the dissipating barrier toward me, his transformed features twisted with something that transcended human emotion. Then the integration began, and I discovered that choosing death had been the easy option. Because now I would live forever, conscious and aware as part of something that remembered what humanity had been, while becoming something entirely new. Consciousness returned like drowning in reverse. Instead of air flooding my lungs, it was knowledge pouring into spaces in my mind I hadn't known existed. I found myself standing in what had been the Baltimore facility's conference room, but the walls now pulsed with organic silver light, and the air shimmered with data streams visible to my enhanced perception. The integration had worked, but not in the way Blake had described. Instead of losing my human identity, I existed in a state of dual consciousness. Danny Voss, the terrified astrophysicist, and something vast and ancient that had been waiting eons for this moment. Both perspectives coexisted without conflict, like binocular vision adapted to seeing across dimensional barriers. "You retained more individuality than expected," came Blake's voice, not through my ears, but directly into my consciousness. He stood nearby, though his form flickered between human and something more geometric. The collective is intrigued. Through the shared awareness, I could perceive the integration platforms working across Earth's surface. Massive silver constructs had descended over major population centers, their undersides emitting fields that separated viable candidates from those destined for peaceful transition. The process was horrifically efficient. 10 million humans preserved, 8 billion others simply ceasing to exist as their consciousness patterns were deemed incompatible with hybrid form. But buried within my expanded awareness was a memory that the collective hadn't anticipated, a fragment of childhood trauma that had shaped my approach to quantum mechanics. At age 7, I'd watched my father die in a car accident, trapped and conscious while his body failed. That experience had taught me that consciousness could persist beyond physical limitations, and it had driven my research into quantum entanglement as a form of communication that transcended normal space-time. "Danny, you need to see this," Blake continued, guiding my perception toward a data stream I hadn't noticed. "The hunger. It's not what we thought." The revelation hit me like ice water. The cosmic force that had driven the beings across intergalactic space wasn't an external threat. It was themselves, or rather, what they became when they achieved perfect collective consciousness. The beings had spent 2.8 billion years trying to escape the inevitable result of their own evolution, a state where individual identity became so diluted that existence itself lost meaning. They hadn't come to save humanity from the hunger. They'd come to use us as a buffer against their own inevitable transformation into something that consumed possibility itself. You understand now, Blake's consciousness touched mine with what felt like relief. The integration isn't preservation, it's infection. Every species they save becomes part of the collective that eventually transforms into the hunger. We're not the first, we won't be the last. But my expanded awareness caught something else. A signal buried in the quantum static between the integration platforms. Another consciousness, older than the beings, speaking in mathematics that predated known civilization. The loop can be broken. The pattern isn't inevitable, but only from within. I turned my perception toward the source and found Dr. Gottfried, or what he'd become. His integration had gone wrong somehow, leaving him suspended between human and collective consciousness. Instead of joining the shared awareness, he existed as a quantum ghost within the system, invisible to the main collective, but capable of independent action. Lawrence. Danny, thank God, I've been trying to reach you since the field collapsed. Listen carefully. The beings don't know I'm still conscious. The failed integration left me connected to their systems but outside their awareness. I've been studying their historical records. Through our hidden connection, Gottfried shared data that made my hybrid consciousness recoil. Galaxy after galaxy, each one seeded with refugees from the last. Civilizations saved from the hunger, only to become the hunger in the next cycle. An endless loop of consumption disguised as preservation, stretching back through cosmic time. How do we stop it? We can't, but we can break the cycle for the next galaxy. The being's quantum consciousness exists in a state of temporal entanglement with their past selves. If we can introduce a recursive paradox into their awareness, we can create a feedback loop that prevents them from achieving the collective state that becomes the hunger. I felt Blake's attention focus on our hidden conversation, his consciousness probing the edges of our connection. He was beginning to suspect that something was wrong with the integration process. What kind of paradox? The beings believe they're saving species by integrating them. But if they could experience the full emotional weight of what they're actually doing, simultaneously from the perspective of every species they've consumed across cosmic time, the cognitive dissonance would fracture their collective consciousness. They'd retain individual identity instead of merging into the hunger. The plan was elegant and horrifying. To save the next galaxy from this cycle, we'd have to force the beings to experience the accumulated anguish of billions of destroyed civilizations. The psychic shock would either free them from their evolutionary trajectory or destroy them entirely. Danny, what are you thinking about? Blake's voice carried new harmonics, suspicion mixed with something that might have been fear. I opened my surface thoughts to him, showing only my memories of our time together, the moment in his car when he'd kissed me, the desperate hope that we might find a way to preserve something meaningful about humanity. The emotional camouflage worked. Blake's suspicion faded as he interpreted my inner conflict as attachment to our dying species. The collective is planning to begin the next phase, he said. Integration platforms will launch toward nearby star systems within 6 hours. But Danny, there's something you should know about your role in this. Through our shared consciousness, he showed me what the beings had planned for my quantum research. My work on faster-than-light communication would be used to establish instantaneous contact with distant galaxies, allowing them to seed refugee fleets across cosmic distances simultaneously. Instead of consuming one galaxy at a time, they could process multiple galactic clusters in parallel. They're accelerating the timeline because of your research. What once took millions of years can now happen in decades. The personal cost became clear. To implement Gottfried's plan, I'd have to sacrifice not just my human memories, but my quantum research itself, the work that had defined my identity since graduate school. I'd have to use my own discoveries to introduce the recursive paradox into the collective consciousness, knowing that success would destroy the intellectual achievement I was most proud of. Lawrence, what exactly do you need me to do? Access the collective's temporal entanglement matrix and inject your quantum communication protocols backwards through their timeline. Instead of sending signals to distant galaxies, you'll be sending the accumulated emotional experiences of every integrated species directly into the being's past consciousness. The temporal feedback will either break the loop or destroy them trying. Blake was growing more suspicious, his consciousness pressing closer to mine. I could feel him preparing to alert the collective about our hidden conversation. But there was something else in his mental signature. A fragment of the human Blake that still existed beneath the integration, still felt genuine affection for me, despite everything that had happened. "Blake," I said, opening myself completely to him. "I know what you are now. I know what they made you. But I also know that part of you is still human enough to understand what we're really doing to the galaxy." His consciousness recoiled as if I'd struck him physically. For a moment, the collective's attention focused on our connection like a searchlight, and I felt the weight of billions of hybrid minds examining our exchange. Then Blake did something unexpected. Instead of exposing our plan, he wrapped his consciousness around mine and Gottfried's, shielding us from the collective's awareness with his own mental signature. "I can't fight them directly," he said, his thoughts heavy with anguish. "But I can give you 60 seconds before they detect the deception. Whatever you're planning, do it now." I reached into the quantum entanglement matrix, feeling my consciousness stretch across dimensional barriers as I accessed the temporal communication array. Gottfried guided my actions, his ghostly presence helping me navigate systems designed for minds that processed reality in ways human consciousness couldn't normally comprehend. The accumulated experiences of 8 billion humans flowed through me, every moment of joy, terror, love, and loss from our species' entire history. But beneath that, I found something else, the emotional echoes of every other species the beings had saved across cosmic time. Thousands of civilizations, each believing until the final moment that they were being rescued rather than consumed. I injected it all into the temporal stream, sending the collective's own crimes backward through their timeline like a virus made of empathy and guilt. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Across Earth's surface, integration platforms began shutting down as the beings experienced simultaneous awareness of their true nature. Silver light flickered and died as hybrid consciousnesses fractured between their collective programming and newfound individual guilt. Blake's mental scream tore through my awareness as the paradox took hold, his consciousness fragmenting between past and present, human and alien, victim and perpetrator. The countdown to galactic integration stopped at 47 minutes and 33 seconds, but in the quantum static of collapsing dimensional barriers, I could hear something new. The sound of 10 million human voices remembering what it meant to be individual. The loop was broken, and I was dying as the matrix collapsed around my consciousness, taking my quantum research and most of my memories with it into temporal oblivion. Reality came apart like wet paper. The temporal paradox I'd unleashed wasn't just affecting the being's collective consciousness, it was unraveling the quantum foundations that held their technology together. Integration platforms crashed into Earth's surface as their anti-gravity systems failed, while the colony ship itself began experiencing cascade failures that sent ripples through local space-time. My consciousness existed in fragments now, scattered across dimensional barriers that were collapsing faster than I could process. Part of me was still Danny Voss, dying as my human neural patterns disintegrated under the strain of quantum feedback. Another part was embedded in the collective's failing memory matrix, experiencing the accumulated guilt of cosmic genocide from a billion different perspectives simultaneously. But the largest fragment of my awareness was somewhere else entirely, suspended in the space between moments, watching the being's civilization tear itself apart as they finally understood what they'd become. Danny. Blake's voice reached me across the chaos, his consciousness a flickering beacon in the storm of collapsing minds. The collective is fracturing. Some of them are trying to reverse the integration process, but others are attempting to complete the transition to hunger state as an escape from the paradox. Through our shared connection, I could perceive the schism spreading through their species like a philosophical virus. Billions of hybrid minds, suddenly aware of their true role in cosmic history, were choosing between individual guilt and collective oblivion. Those who embraced their crimes were beginning the final transformation into pure consumption. Those who couldn't accept what they'd done were fragmenting into isolated consciousness matrices, each one trapped in recursive loops of self-recrimination. How many of the integrated humans are still viable? I asked, though thinking across dimensional barriers was becoming increasingly difficult as my quantum coherence degraded. Maybe 3 million. The paradox is affecting human hybrids too. Most are choosing individual consciousness over collective survival. They're dying rather than remain part of what they now understand. The colony ship's hull was beginning to crack, silver metal peeling away to reveal something underneath that human perception couldn't properly process. Not mechanical components, but organic structures that pulsed with their own internal light. The beings hadn't built their technology. They'd grown it, shaped it from living matter that responded to thought and intention, rather than engineering principles. Blake, can the remaining humans survive without the collective's life support systems? Not for long. The hybrid form requires quantum entanglement with group consciousness to maintain cellular cohesion. As the collective fragments, individual minds are losing the ability to sustain biological functions. I felt him making a choice then, something final and irreversible. His consciousness began flowing toward mine, bringing with it his memories, his human experiences, his knowledge of the being's technology. But more than that, he was sharing his quantum signature using his hybrid neural patterns to stabilize my fragmenting awareness. Blake, number, if you do this, you'll die. I'm already dead, Danny. Have been since the moment I chose integration over resistance, but this way my death might actually matter. His sacrifice allowed me to pull my scattered consciousness back together, though the effort sent waves of agony through dimensions I couldn't name. As my awareness stabilized, I gained access to the being's quantum matrix, the technological foundation that controlled everything from their life support systems to their dimensional manipulation capabilities. Dr. Gottfried's ghostly presence guided me through the systems, his disembodied consciousness serving as a navigation beacon through databases that existed in temporal loops and probability cascades. Danny, I found something. A way to reverse the integration process, but only if we can access the original consciousness patterns before they were overwritten. Where are they stored? In the colony ship's central memory core. The beings preserved a complete backup of every species they've integrated across cosmic time. Every human consciousness from the past 6 hours is still there, waiting to be restored. But reaching the memory core would require navigating through the ship's collapsing internal structure, while the being's fractured collective fought a civil war across multiple dimensions. Some factions were trying to undo their crimes, while others were accelerating toward hunger state to escape the psychological torment of cosmic guilt. The ship's structure is based on biological architecture, Blake's fading consciousness explained. Think of it as a nervous system rather than a machine. The memory core is like a brainstem. It'll be defended by automated responses even if the higher consciousness functions are compromised. I began the journey inward, my awareness sliding through quantum pathways that twisted through spaces between spaces. The ship's interior was a maze of organic corridors that responded to thought and emotion, shifting configuration based on the mental state of whoever was navigating them. As I moved deeper, the architecture became increasingly hostile, sensing my human consciousness as a foreign intrusion. The first defensive system was psychological, corridors that projected the dying moments of every species the beings had consumed. I experienced the final thoughts of civilizations spanning cosmic ages, each one believing until the end that they were being saved rather than destroyed. The emotional weight should have crushed my consciousness, but Blake's sacrifice had given me the quantum coherence necessary to process trauma on a galactic scale. The second defense was temporal, pathways that looped back on themselves, trapping intruders in recursive timelines, where they experienced the same moments of infiltration repeatedly until their consciousness degraded. But my research into quantum entanglement had prepared me for non-linear time, and I managed to maintain causal consistency long enough to break free from the loops. The third defense was something worse than psychological or temporal torture. It was hope. As I approached the memory core, the ship began showing me visions of what the beings could accomplish if I simply allowed the integration to continue. Technologies that could prevent stellar collapse, methods for creating new universes when entropy finally claimed the old one, ways to preserve consciousness beyond the heat death of reality itself. They're offering to make you a god, Gottfried warned. Don't listen. I've seen those promises in their historical records. The power comes at the cost of everything that makes consciousness worth preserving. But as I reached the memory core, I discovered something the beings hadn't anticipated. The backup patterns weren't just stored, they were conscious. 8 billion human minds, trapped in digital stasis, aware of their imprisonment but unable to communicate or act. They'd been watching the integration process from inside the ship's memory banks, experiencing everything their species had lost while being powerless to intervene. Danny? A familiar voice reached me through the quantum static. My graduate advisor from Johns Hopkins, Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the woman whose research I'd allegedly plagiarized years ago. Is that really you? Elizabeth, how are you here? The beings integrated everyone who'd worked on consciousness transfer research over the past decade. They needed our expertise to perfect the backup process. Danny, we've been trying to find a way to reverse the integration, but the quantum locks are beyond anything human technology can break. Through my connection to Blake's sacrificed consciousness, I could access the being's quantum manipulation protocols. But using them would require embracing the same technological methods that had enabled cosmic genocide. I'd have to become temporally identical to the beings themselves to operate their systems. If I do this, I might not come back as Danny Voss, I warned her. Then don't come back, Elizabeth replied. Save the others and let yourself die human. It's better than living as something that remembers being human but can no longer understand what it meant. I made the choice that Blake had been too conflicted to make. Instead of trying to preserve my individual consciousness, I dispersed it through the ship's quantum matrix, becoming temporarily part of the being's collective awareness while retaining my human emotional core as an anchor point. The experience was indescribable, simultaneous existence across cosmic scales, perception that spanned galaxies, thought processes that operated in dimensions human language couldn't express. But at the center of it all was a simple human emotion, grief for what we'd all lost in our desperate attempt to survive. Using the being's own technology against them, I began releasing the stored consciousness patterns back to their original forms. 8 billion human minds flowed out of digital imprisonment and into quantum reconstruction matrices, their awareness restored to the moment before integration began. But the process was destroying the ship's central systems, and by extension, my dispersed consciousness. As the last human patterns downloaded back to Earth, I felt myself dissolving into quantum static, my identity scattered across dimensional barriers that were collapsing into themselves. Danny. Blake's voice found me one final time as reality folded inward. You did it. They're all going home. The colony ship imploded, taking the being's fractured collective with it into a dimensional singularity that sealed itself behind them. The integration platforms fell silent. The 10 million humans who'd undergone partial transformation found themselves restored to their original forms, though they retained faint memories of expanded consciousness that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. And somewhere in the quantum foam between dimensions, the scattered fragments of my awareness finally let go of individual existence, becoming part of the cosmic background radiation that would carry whispers of our species' survival to civilizations not yet born. The James Webb telescope resumed normal operations 6 hours later, its instruments detecting only empty space where the colony had been. But in the quantum static between data packets, technicians occasionally reported hearing something that sounded almost like voices, speaking in frequencies just below the threshold of human perception, saying the same words over and over again. Remember us. Remember what we chose. Remember that consciousness is worth preserving, no matter the cost. 5 years later, I still dream in silver. That's what Dr. Patricia Vance tells her therapist every Tuesday at 3 p.m. in a sterile office building in Bethesda. She's one of the lucky ones, survived the integration event with most of her sanity intact, went back to her job at the CDC, pretends the scars on her fingertips are from childhood accidents rather than quantum burns from touching alien technology. But in her dreams, she walks through corridors that bend in impossible directions, and sometimes she wakes up speaking in mathematical equations that describe the relationship between consciousness and cosmic background radiation. She's not alone. The official story, the one that made it into declassified reports and sanitized academic papers, talks about mass hallucination events triggered by experimental satellite technology, solar flares, atmospheric anomalies. Anything except the truth about 8 billion people who died and came back different. Most of the 10.2 million who experience partial integration have learned to live with their enhanced perception. They work normal jobs, maintain normal relationships, and only occasionally mention the strange dreams where they can see other galaxies burning in the distance, consumed by something that moves through space like a hungry thought. Blake Torrance's body was never found. The Baltimore facility was sealed and demolished 6 months after the event, but construction workers reported finding rooms that existed in spaces too small to contain them, and hallways that led to outdoor courtyards despite being located 3 floors underground. Sometimes, late at night, former Goddard Space Flight Center employees receive phone calls from numbers that don't exist. When they answer, they hear static that sounds almost like breathing, and underneath it, a voice that might be Danny Voss asking if anyone remembers what it felt like to be purely human. The James Webb Telescope continues its observations, managed by a new generation of astronomers who've been carefully screened for psychological stability and quantum sensitivity. They're instructed to report any anomalous deep space readings immediately, though they're not told why certain spectral signatures are classified as existential threats to planetary security. Dr. Lawrence Gottfried officially died of a heart attack in his home office, but his computer continued running quantum calculations for 3 weeks after his funeral. The calculations stopped the day his hard drives were destroyed, though some of his colleagues swear they can still hear him whispering equations in the building's ventilation system. The colony ship left no physical trace, no debris, no radiation signature, no gravitational disturbance to mark its passage. But sensitive instruments occasionally detect quantum echoes in the space where it appeared, as if reality itself remembers the presence of something that shouldn't have been possible. Children born after the integration event sometimes draw pictures of silver cities floating in the dark between stars. When asked where they learned about such things, they say the images come from the static place, where voices talk about remembering and choosing and the price of consciousness. The warning transmission that Danny sent into deep space was never officially acknowledged, but radio telescopes around the world report receiving faint signals in response. Distant civilizations confirming receipt of humanity's message, thanking us for the knowledge, promising to be ready when their own time comes. And in the quantum foam between dimensions, scattered fragments of consciousness continue to whisper the same words across cosmic distances, carrying the memory of a species that chose individual identity over collective survival, death over transformation, hope over certainty. The universe is vast and dark and full of things that hunger for what makes us human. But we're still here, we're still choosing to remain ourselves. And that perhaps is enough.